Well, hello and welcome back to the Commonplace. My name is Autumn Kern, and I am joined once again by my friend Rick Seigmund. Rick, hello and welcome back.
Hello, Autumn. It's so great to be here with you all again.
Thank you. I am going to link above, I'll just say it now, my last conversation with Rick. So, in case you missed it, I met Rick after I'd had some troubles on the nature trail. I had some safety issues, and I made a video about a couple of habits that I thought really helped our family get out of those situations safely and quickly. And Rick contacted me to say those were great tips, but he had more if I wanted to know more. And we ended up connecting. I learned about his background, his passion for family safety and preparedness. And so I invited Rick on to talk about how we handle those tricky people we meet out in public, whether that be the parking lot or the nature trail. But in that conversation, which will be linked above, Rick mentioned a different type of predator that sent chills through my bones. And that was the type that grooms your entire family. And the way he described it that day was they groom the parents to trust them and they groom the children potentially to harm them. And so that is going to be the topic of the day. It's going to probably be a little heavy, maybe not something to listen to while you are cooking dinner and have kids around. Maybe listen by yourself with your husband before you introduce these ideas in your home for safety. Because I was talking to Rick before you hit record, and he said it's been a couple weeks of some intense research that's been even hard for him to handle. So there's your warning. But before we jump in, Rick, will you give us a recap on your bio, how you came to love sharing about these things, helping families, and what projects you're working on now?
Oh, well, my trip through the wardrobe,
Yeah, exactly.
shall we say. Um, I'm a dad, and but before that, I was a United States Border Patrol agent, and I headed up my station's intelligence division. We dealt with cartel activity, worked with all the other three-letter agencies that the United States has in many different ways, the Joint Terrorist Task Force and all that. But my things were always kids. That's my line in the sand, proverbially, before even having kids. And once we had kids, it got worse. And so I left the patrol. I went into private security and consulting and have dealt a lot with that. And we've helped out different organizations like different Ronald McDonald houses in the nation, different hospitals, healthcare systems. Predation's a big thing there, as well as houses of worship. And so you learn a lot. You learn too much. And I always like to say that somebody's badge and credentials is all it is a ticket to open the door. It doesn't mean that that trains you for any of this. This topic comes with immersion, whether you like it or not. And to me, it's distasteful. I've dealt with a lot of these topics before, but it's heavy being a dad because you cannot help but put your kids and those you care about in place of certain images. So I'm going to double on what you just said to parents. I would ask that you preview this before you let your kids listen to it. I think it might be appropriate for certain older kids who have the maturity to hear some of this stuff. And I'm going to ask Autumn. I will not get graphic, but I will put some pretty uncomfortable, distasteful things out if she wants.
Okay.
And I'm going to be careful with that, but it's things people need to visualize and think about a little bit. And and I'm going to do it appropriately, but this is an adult conversation. So I've dealt with child trafficking. I've dealt with victim recovery. I've dealt with all the above, and I have a specific stance on that. You're too late at that point. And you're not too late to save the kids, but I say this to everybody I can, whenever I can. Your children lose their innocence once, and that's it. And so it is my desire in the world to defend and protect not just my family, my kids, my wife, but yours as well. It's my one thing. So that's why I'm back on with you, Autumn, because I want to proclaim this to the world and keep going with it, because the more families and parents we get to honorably take the helm of responsibility for this aspect, the better off we're going to be. Because it's not that police and law enforcement don't want to help, but they are called responders for a reason. Okay. And that's a fact. And I hate to say it, that most departments do not have anyone who deals with predation. When it falls in their lap, they do. But most of the time, they simply do not have the manpower or resources to pursue this. Even the FBI has a really difficult time staying on top of this stuff. So this is why it's my goal in life to bring topics like these to parents and really re-engage mom and dad to be ready for these kind of things and not to live in fear. I hate that. I personally viscerally hate the fear hammer that a lot of people in my industry kind of hammer people with. Not at all. But the more empowered you are, kind of like you're talking to your family about tricky people in the woods, the more capable you are thinking about it and able to deal with such things when situations do arise.
Yeah, I actually love that about our last conversation. Even though we went into some dark waters and some scary things, I always found a very hopeful side that we as parents can have knowledge and therefore be prepared. We can habit train ourselves, we can habit train our kids. There are so many steps that we can take, but it first starts with that understanding and knowledge. If we're not going to face reality about what is actually possible and what might happen, then we're going to lose it from there. But if we're willing to handle that and we can do that well and we can do that without fear, but just with preparedness, then we can move forward. And I know I received so many messages. I hope you were able to catch the comments. I know I got a lot of private messages and emails of women thanking us for that conversation and for the wisdom you shared and how much it either strengthened their conviction to be prepared and to talk to their kids about these things, to have plans, or how much it kind of opened their eyes to like, oh, I didn't even know I really need to be thinking about these things. So I'm very excited to have you back, even though it's a heavy topic. So you introduced this predator to me last time. And what was interesting is I've been thinking about it since the time we talked to now is that that's kind of the predator I always had the built-in fear for, because I think growing up in the 90s and 2000s, we heard a lot of terrible stories from sleepovers and church events and all these things that came out. And it was always someone that the family knew. And that kind of seems more like this predator. So if you were going to give a definition for this type of predator, how would you describe them?
Evil.
Yes.
Absolute evil. And I'm going to preempt my specific definition with I'm going to say something to follow what you just said. You got responses from a lot of people, and I did my absolute best to also respond to people commenting on YouTube. And we invite that, by the way. If you have comments or information, I learn from you all as well, because my experience is very different than everyone else's, and I appreciate people speaking up. That being said, you know as well as I, there are a lot of people on there, a lot of women who had dealt with that, the topic we were talking about when they were younger or had a friend. It always comes up. I'm going to go ahead and say this. I know there are people who are going to watch this who have dealt with that in their past, who may be dealing with it right now, or who may have a predator in their family. And that's a tough one, but that's just a fact. Statistically, there's a lot. So these people are very intelligent. Predators like we're talking about are the least prosecuted individuals on the face of the planet because they do groom the whole family. And so when a child does give an indication that they're uncomfortable, they're scared, something's off, many times moms and dads, right or wrong, say, oh no, Uncle such and such would never do that. Pastor so-and-so would never do that. Coach so-and-so has been a dear friend of ours for years. Yes, most of the time it's men. And it's men who are devious and they delight in what they do. And I could go into the myriad of reasons why they do this. That's not the topic for this conversation. The topic for this conversation is how they do it, what they do, and getting families ready to be proactive about such things. Because the litany of reasons is overwhelming on the different topics, on whether it's pedophilia or sadists, and the topics go on, and there are some very real psychological designations to these individuals and how they operate and how they think. I don't care. All I want to do is take care of your kids. Yeah. So there's a brief definition of the topic, but they're very good at what they do. Mm-hmm. They love being in control. They love hiding it. And they also love showing their power and influence to your kids with mom and dad around. Mm-hmm. That's part of the game for them.
You mentioned that in our last conversation, which really, really struck me, and why I was like, I know we have to have a part 2 to this. So when we are thinking about how adults interact with our children, are there types of warning signs that parents should be noting before we even get to like how we maybe protect our children in those situations, because we all have had those moments where a kid doesn't want to hug someone, or it looks like they're uncomfortable because someone's touching their shoulder, and we have to step in and make sure that we address the boundary for them or for our children, for the stranger, the adult, whoever it is. But when we're watching, is there anything we should be noting for and how these individuals move within the family?
Wanting to spend time with children alone, wanting to get them away from you, want to giving gifts, right? Like a lot of times it's like, and it's not only single males, it's males, it's just other people. But why do you want to keep giving my kid gifts? You know,
Mm.
where's that came from? And it can be free, sweet, and it can be one of those situations where, oh, such and such, always, he just loves my kids. It's like, yeah, but you know, this is me from my experience. They don't need to be constantly showering your child with gifts. It's inappropriate.
Mm.
Okay. And it's also the simply spending time with them, wanting to be in the back seat with them while they're riding in the car with you. And I'll tell a story about that. I'll jump off the cliff like I warned you about immediately. Initially, there are stories of predators. Mom and dad are sitting in the front seat, and they'll be in the back seat with a child or two, and they will touch the children right there with mom and dad present. And it's a psychological play. They're
Mhm.
doing it because they get a thrill from mom and dad being right there, and they're still able to do it. And it's also a sign of power, control, and authority to your children that, hey, your mom and dad are right there, and I'm doing this, and therefore they're probably okay with it.
Hmm.
It's nefarious as all get out, and that's a single situational instance, but there are many. Okay.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to let the cat out of the bag up front, but we can continue the conversation, and we will. I interviewed the lady who's the tip of the spear. I mentioned her in our last interview, a lady named Dr. Anna Salter, and I
Yes.
will provide links to her book. It's called Predator.
Mhm.
She's amazing. She's interviewed probably more of these individuals than anybody in the entire nation. And she gets asked that question all the time. How do I detect? How do I
Mhm.
know? And she says, I can't know. I don't know if these people are telling the truth or lying or anything. I've never been able to determine lies to truth because they are so good. Their entire purpose in life is to deceive. And so she says, I prefer deflection over detection. And
What
that's
does
a
that
really
mean?
interesting way to put it.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Right. Spend time with your kids. If your kid has an event, if your kid has a game, if your kid has a recital or piano practice or anything, be the parent and be there.
Yes.
Period.
Mhm.
She's a PhD. She travels the globe speaking and teaching, and she was at every single recital, practice, event her kid ever had. She's got a story of her kid's baseball team. She was at every single practice and game, and she said that they were doing a trip, and the coach asked the team, "What parent do you guys want representing us on this trip?" And all the other kids picked her
Mm.
because she was present.
Mhm.
Simple as that.
So it's almost like your presence is the deflection, just your regular of being there is some form of a protection for your child. Even though I'm thinking about your car example, you're in the car.
Mm-hmm.
That's the That's a bit of a catch 22 there. I know I am that parent. Like we mentioned this last time. We don't allow sleepovers. We don't do church functions where I'm not there. I'm just always present. Or if we both can be, that's even more ideal. But I am sometimes made to feel a little funny about that. Like I'm just overreaching, being at every practice and every event that they could possibly go to. But I do feel like being there with my eyes, not glued just to my kid, but looking around, noticing, getting to know people, but being there is important as a sort of sign that like I'm with my child, I'm caring for my child, I want to protect my child. So that's kind of her point, is just to be that parent.
It's actually the main thing that a predator will look for. And I'm going to blatantly put it out. The number one deterrent in that they have articulated this, multiple predators over hundreds of interviews, a strong and present father is the number
Yes.
one deterrent. If you have a
Okay.
strong and present dad who really is around and pays attention, they will go someplace easier.
Mm,
The second thing is the mom. If the mom looks weak and appears kind of timid and depressed, that's permission for
okay.
them. And I'm not saying that to harm anybody or hurt feelings. I'm just simply stating this is what they say they look for.
Mm,
And it's exactly that. They want families who are easier, who they can manipulate, they'll invest years in this. And this is something else that I learned. It's like they put themselves in position of influence and authority on purpose for a lifetime of this. The average predator has 70 to 140 victims. That's an FBI
whoa.
statistic. That's correct. And
Whoa.
so here's what happens. Kids will raise the alarm and say, hey, coach such and such, I don't want to go with him to, no, you've got to go. I don't have time for this. Or, hey, coach such and such may have done something. And many times, too many times, parents will side with the adult, the predator,
Mhm.
over their own child because
Mhm.
they have been groomed as part of this process for so long,
Mhm.
telling themselves they're trusted, their family, they're all the kind words our society uses. That's what is. It's a tool. It's a tool of manipulation and process that these individuals use for this purpose. And
Right.
so again, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was just going to say, I think that's what struck me in our first conversation was the idea that parents have been brought along in this with probably not even knowing it. Like I would
Mhm.
think, oh, no, I would be aware sort of thing. But then when you mentioned that, I thought, how often does someone maybe compliment my child? And that kind of draws me into like a warm feeling for them. Like, oh, you appreciate that my child's good at this thing. That's so nice of you. Thank you. And that could be an element of earning my trust or earning my just like warm feeling towards them so that I might be more likely to overestimate their goodness.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's part of the game. And so here's what I don't want. I don't want people to like put the walls up like we're no friends. No friends
Right.
ever. We're not doing
No
this. We're just no
activities. Yeah.
humanity. We're
Yeah.
done. No, that's terrible. But I will put things out that single men, is it appropriate for a single man to want your kids to spend the night with them? It's like, oh, Uncle such and such, have a sleepover. You will have no idea how many people think that's a great thing and allow it to happen.
Really? So that just sounds,
Really?
I know it's anecdotal, but I feel like a lot of our generation, because of experiencing things with coaches or family members or church events, they're very like, no sleepovers. We don't let our kids go places. It just seems kind of common in my, at least peer group, to not allow these things. So that just sounds wild to me. Like, who would ever do that?
Precisely, but you actually said it. Your peer group, my peer group,
Right.
we're exactly the
Right.
same. My kids will never do a sleepover till they're married. You know,
Right.
it'll be great. But
We have to do. Yeah.
amen. But we're those parents. We're exactly the same, and that's a beautiful thing. But it's also an issue because you already said you've been made feel
Hmm.
odd in certain instances. That you're here, you're watching your kids. Why don't you?
Hmm.
I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. When my kids go somewhere, my wife, or a lot of the times me, are there with them. And it is
Hmm.
shocking how many parents just pull up, open the door, drop their kids off wherever, and leave.
Yes.
And, and like a scout troop or American Trails or whatever they call it up here, they're like dying on the vines for dads to show up and be part of something with their own kids. And
Yeah.
it's just such a rarity to have a dad show up. And so that's a statement on culture and society, but it's also why we get the weird looks like, you're here every week, aren't you? And it's like,
Hmm.
yes. Why, yes, I am. And I'm also
Yeah.
watching their kids.
Yeah. It's true. It does feel like that. We've had even an incident at ballet where someone came into the studio from out in the city claiming to know the owner and then spent a lot of time in a bathroom. No one knew where she was. And the studio did send out an email to alert the parents this happened. They had to call the cops and things, but I was on campus when it happened. And the email I did not think did it justice to the things parents should have been following up with their daughters, primarily at ballet, about. Like, I did not think it was appropriate. It did not meet the need. But again, it's one of those things where if you're not there, you don't know. So I do think one thing for moms to consider when they're doing extracurriculars is, can you make that schedule. Like that is one thing that we talk about in our home, because my husband is also very pro one of us being there. It usually happens to be me during the day, but can you be at those things? Don't schedule so many things that you're dropping kids off at different places and you physically just can't be there. Something to consider. Now I wanted to follow up on when children do try to share with their parents. I'm assuming that through developmental stages, the way a child might bring this to a parent will look different. So could you maybe tell us how kids might either show, for younger kids, show that maybe something has made them uncomfortable, maybe someone has harmed them, has touched them, or as they age, maybe words or ways they might try to communicate it that a parent might just miss?
A really common thing, which is really, really difficult with young kids because we hear it at different times, my tummy hurts.
Yeah, physical ailments.
My tummy hurts is
Okay.
a very common one. Um, there's different reasons why their tummy might hurt. Not going to go into that here,
Mm-hmm.
but pay attention to those small things. Or the kid just shrinking away from somebody, or you said it earlier, I don't want to hug such and such. We've never made our kids hug anyone, and I
Right.
do not care who it is. Matter of fact, we've got one of our little girls, our youngest, just like she'll hug anyone and anything, and you've got a little like, no, get back here.
Right.
Um, and you have to reiterate, we don't hug everybody, and that's appropriate as well. So as we're continuing this question and answer on what are some common things kids say, this is part of being around your kids and knowing your kids. Like, is this normal for them to say about somebody?
Right.
You know your kids. At the end of the day, let's not play games with ourselves pretending like, oh, they didn't really mean that. Well, maybe they did.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another thing: ask questions appropriately and often. Have
Okay.
body conversations, have safety conversations. I was thinking about this for this interview. It's like the old sad joke from I think the 50s. Husband and wife get married, and on their wedding day, the husband says told his wife, "I love you," and then the wife never hears it again. And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
and the husband's like, "Well, I told you with the
You
day
were
we
supposed
got
to know.
married. That's
Yeah.
enough. You're supposed to know." No, this is not how we talk to our kids. Make it habitual, make it regular, make it common. Keep it appropriate, but we talk about our safety. We talk about strangers. We talk about what's appropriate and inappropriate. Adults never need help.
Mm-hmm. That's one of
If an
ours as
adult
well.
comes to ask you for help, even if it's somebody we know, come get me.
Mm-hmm.
We tell our kids that, like, the rarity. We got a 12-year-old now. We're letting kids do things, and so every once in a while, mom and dad will leave the house and leave the 12-year-old in charge. But even then, they know the door stays locked,
Mm-hmm.
even if somebody we know shows up.
Mm-hmm.
Period. That is the rule, and they know this. They have a way to get in touch with us immediately should something take place, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
The term helicopter parent, I firmly believe that people with nefarious intent in the world of psychology created that word for parents like you and I to
To feel bad.
defame us to society. I
Mm-hmm.
completely do. Because they want people who are just saying, yeah, lackadaisical, my kid can do anything. That'll never happen. And that's another one. It's the concept, those things don't happen here. Things don't happen to me. It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
that's just not true, because they surely do.
Mm-hmm.
They happen everywhere.
Right. I'm thinking about the mom who's listening whose kids are at school. So we're obviously homeschoolers. We have our kids with us all the time. But in a situation like that, where a child leaves for 8 hours a day and the parent is not able to just attend class all day with them, what kind of habits or points of safety, talking points, would you say would be really important to give maybe an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school student?
Oof, elementary school. That hurts.
I
I
know.
just hurts me seeing little kids with big backpacks waiting for a bus. It personally bothers me, but I digress. Again, age appropriate, regular conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, no one should ever, touch you. Have the private parts conversation, have the closed conversation, have
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff for the elementary school kids. Have it regularly. Have a safety talk every week. And here's another thing, and I think I mentioned this our last conversations. If you're a parent who has built up a facade or a presence at home where your kids are genuinely probably scared to talk to you, fix that.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot emphasize it enough. I tell my kids this, my older kids, because all kids lie about certain things at different times. That's just, we're human. We're fallen creatures of creation, right?
Mhm.
And I tell them, I'm like, listen, there's going to come a day where you need me to believe you. That is why telling me the truth now is so important, and truth has far lesser consequences than lies in our home.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we love on our kids, we hold them accountable, we have high standards for them, but we are involved. We talk openly about a lot of things. I'd rather my kids learn from the Bible and myself all the things that are going on in the world than wait for some dumb school kid to tell them, or friend, or grown up somewhere to introduce them to concepts that is completely inappropriate. So again, it's beating this horse repeatedly, but have these conversations with your kid every day if it needs to be. So young kids, body safety, all this other stuff. You tell me who adults are and all this. And be involved with the school, be involved with the teachers, let them know who you are
Hmm.
on a first name basis. I'll tell this story from my childhood. I never knew it till I was older. Apparently, the principal of my elementary school was a major predator, and he articulated. He went to jail for a long time. And a lot of my friends, my dear friends from kindergarten, were victims of his. And he articulated, my family, the Seigmund family, is the reason he didn't mess with us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, back
So
to your point about probably a strong dad and a present mother who didn't seem weak.
absolutely, and really big brothers, but it's the full picture.
Yeah.
Um, it's the full picture, and it's really important. So be really involved, be proactive, be overt, drop heavy-handed hints.
Mm.
I'm not afraid to say things to an adult like, woe be the human who ever lays a hand on my kid in any way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
appropriate.
I'm also thinking of the sibling set. If you have multiple kids who are in school, having them trained to check in on each other when they pass in the hallway or they're at lunchtime, just little check-ins so that that family unit, like you're saying, you had the big brothers. There was a
Yeah,
whole unit going on there. That also might be a nice way to create some camaraderie and some safety within the pod of siblings.
100%. And
Mhm.
that's really important. It's family cohesion. It's hopefully sibling love is mixed in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's that ideology that we pass to our kids. We are a family. We take care of one another. We take care of our friends, but we have to be okay. So you make the family holy, holy, set apart. Truly, we're a family. We listen to God. We are all important in His eyes and in our eyes. We love one another. Therefore, we help care for one another.
Hmm.
Um, I heard a very interesting phrase. I hang around with a bunch of former military guys a lot, and one of them said, "Someone who's not his brother's keeper is complicit in his destruction." And
Hmm.
very interesting take on something that people don't want to be a part of. It's like, oh, it's not my business. That's not me. I'm not going to get involved. It's like, well, really, why? Why?
You have a duty to one another. Yes.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm now thinking about the mom because I've actually had this question in Common House. Maybe you've heard it in some of the Q&As. And usually it's around family holidays, which I know we're going into the holiday season here shortly, where someone says something, which I'm sure you have experienced, like a random uncle, oh, come sit in my lap. And you physically see your child like tighten up, like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's very appropriate to say, you don't have to do that to the child. Remind them publicly in front of that adult as well. Like, you may choose if you would like to sit with this person, give them a hug or not. But I know a lot of moms, while in their heads are like, yes, I would step in. I would make sure that I drew that line. Actually, in that moment, are like, oh my gosh, what do I say? I don't want to be rude to this person. I want to make sure my child feels protected. How am I supposed to handle this? Can you maybe walk us through some really good lines for moms to have in their back pocket on how to draw that line, put the adult back in their place, honor their child, let their child know you're good, you're safe, you don't have to do this? How do moms handle those situations?
Yes, talk about it today,
Yeah.
before the holidays. Tell your kids you never have to sit in anybody's lap. You
Mm.
never have to hug anyone. And it's not to make your kids little,
Like
prickly
rude to
pear.
grandma. Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to hug you. Mommy said I didn't have to hug you, Grandma.
Right,
Go
exactly.
pound sand.
Exactly.
Make grandma cry. Let's not do that either.
That's what the moms worry about. Exactly.
Yeah, take care of grandma. But you know what? Have an open and yes, you're gonna have to be tread lightly and read your family, know who and who you cannot have this conversation with, but put it out there to your close family like, hey, this is how we're doing our kids. You can like it, you can not, but they do not have to hug if they don't want. They surely don't have to sit in somebody's lap. And if they're scared, we're going to back our kids every day. Your kids need to hear you saying that. And then you need to, again, habitually and often say it to your kids. Don't sit in somebody's lap if you don't want to. Or let's say that let's go down this path. Let's say they got Susie to sit in Uncle John's lap, and Susie's tired and wiggly and wants to get up and go play with every other kid that's there, and Uncle Johnny grabs her and pulls her back. Have a word for that. Have a code word. Have it practiced.
Yes, code words. Okay, please say more and add in code words. Those are so helpful for kids to know I have a path out of this. Like I have a path, my mom will know.
Sure. Mommy, Daddy, I need you.
Yeah. Or
Simple as that.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. I was thinking like popcorn or something like a code word, but
yeah. Or be overt. Uncle Johnny, why won't you let me go? Be clear, be loud. Because if I'm standing there and Uncle Johnny's holding on to you again, I'm like, Johnny, let the kid up immediately, or I will be in your lap.
Yeah, and that might be something to also gauge with your kids. Like I have some kids that would be very overt, like let go of me, I want to go. Like that's just how they would communicate. And I have others where we've had to create a family code word so that they have something that they feel they can say when it's hard for them to articulate that they don't like something's happening. And I think that's just sometimes just knowing the kid. Some kids will be overt and some will not, and you need to equip the ones who might struggle in those moments.
And you can role play different scenarios, surely. And this is a take home for all of you listening. Some of you have had these experiences. It's just happened to you or dear friends of yours or family members. Have those conversations. Say, this happened to my friend, and start role playing with that. Okay. It's appropriate. Like I'm a very physical guy with my kids, as in we play rough, we play hard, we play fun, but we wrestle. Like I literally bring out pads and have our kids start boxing in it. And right now it's play. For the older ones, they're starting to understand things, but like let kids know what appropriate roughhousing is and what inappropriate roughhousing is, because there are both. Yes. Okay. And it's not just going to be older men. Okay, this is something I wanted to come back to you. Yes. Many times it's another kid.
Yes.
Teenager, 10, 11, 12 to 14, 15, 16. Many of these predators have these urges and they start early with friends and family members often. So don't just look for guys who are all gray like me. No. Or 30-something-year-old man. No. It's cousin Billy from Wisconsin or wherever. I'm not being mean to Wisconsin. We like the state. But you understand what I'm saying here. It's like let's break our paradigm of what we think is like Joe Predator guy. No, it's handsome young such and such who's such a good boy. Well, that good boy is a lot of times starting to play with being a predator and understands what they're doing, and they're being very purposeful and quiet about it and very manipulative. Okay. So it's a range of humanity. Are there women who do this? Yes. It's very rare. It's incredibly rare. So the vast majority of what I'm talking about is man-centric, but it's also young man-centric. There's that.
I'm glad you mentioned peer on peer, because that is a whole category that I think people forget about. Especially, I know many people have play dates where you're there, but all the kids are running around upstairs. There's an older brother or he has a neighbor friend over, and you don't actually know all the kids in the house, and they're just out of sight, even though you're in the house. Again, back to that point of you can be present and still not notice. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. I am curious if we are if we're having continuous problems, maybe with that family member, how do you then address it with the adult? Do you have recommendations for maybe it's dad who takes this person aside for a private conversation, the sorts of things you need to communicate to make sure that this stops?
It depends. It depends on the situation, the individual. If you feel like they're targeting your kids, get get very proactive very quickly.
Mhm.
It's not something to play around with. If it's appropriate, if they've crossed the proverbial line, go immediately to the police. Make
Mhm.
a report.
Mhm.
Back up your kid. Do the
Mhm.
right thing. And I'm saying that carefully because we live in a litigious and very knee-jerk society, and I don't want people to be like, Uncle Greg put his arm around Sally. He's going to jail.
Right.
No, please God, no. Let's not do that either.
Mhm.
Let's have some thought process going on here. But put parameters in place with your kids, with other people, educate them as much as possible, be present and aware, and yes, speak directly, very directly if you need to. Listen to your kids often, and it's a tough situation, and also just don't go to events where they are. If that's
Mhm.
the line that you have to do, just it's cut it off. They will not be there. So I'm going to go back to Dr. Salter again, and I may have told this story. She was at a school dance with her daughter. Her daughter was 6, and of course Dr. Salter was there, and so she sees her daughter dancing with her dear little friend and her dear little friend's dad. And so she gets to talking, and all of a sudden 30 minutes go by, and she looks over, and her daughter's still dancing with her little friend, and the dad's still there. And Dr. Salter's like, huh, well, that's odd. So she walks through the crowd, grabs her daughter's hand, and the man grabs her daughter's arm and yanks her back to him. And Dr. Salter immediately introduced herself. I am her mother, grabbed her kid, got in
Oh,
the
my
car,
child.
and drove home.
Yeah.
And on the way home, and this family was a very well known family, very influential family in their community. On the way home, she called her nanny and said, my daughter will never go to their house, have a dinner, have a meal, go play, anything at all. And the nanny, obviously, they were used to doing that. And the nanny's like, well, what do I say? And her response was, tell them she's writing her doctoral dissertation. She's painting with Van Gogh, whatever you need to, but she's not ever going over there again. And
Yeah.
she never found out if this guy was anything. And
Mhm.
were there public and social waves that were uh, caused by that situation? Yes, there were. Was it worth it? To
Yes.
Dr. Salter, it was. Okay. So this is where moms and dads have to have a really serious look at themselves. Are you willing to do this? You
Mhm.
know, it's hard. I'm not saying it's not difficult. I'm not saying there's cause and effect to these decisions. You're going to be the families like, oh, they're so weird.
They're so weird.
Do they don't let their kids do sleepover. Those poor kids are missing out,
Mhm.
and so on. Right? We can
Mhm.
keep that conversation going infinitely almost.
Mhm.
I don't care because
Yeah.
I'm an advocate for your kids and my kids. Because again, they lose their innocence once.
Once, and that's what I always think about. I mean, these types of things are soul ruining. Not that God is outside of healing, but just these things mar. They give you a forever limp. Like these are very dangerous, very painful sorts of things. We actually have on our one of our city buildings down in the heart of the city. There's a huge billboard, and it talks about the statistics for these sorts of things. And I'm not sure if these are up to date. I've just read them for years walking by them. But it's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys by the time they're 16 will have had
Mhm.
something done to them. I don't know if that you probably have updated statistics, so that's
I've
still
heard that
accurate.
statistic for
Yeah.
years and years. I think
Yeah.
it's about right.
So I see that all of the time. And 4 is not a very large number. I can think of 3 of my daughter's little friends and put the 4 of them together, and it's one of them, you know? Now, you have older children than I do. And so at this point, my kids are pretty used to like whatever we say is how it's going to run. This is it. But you have 12 and 10. So what do you do when your child starts to push back maybe on some of these social things that everyone else gets to do? To your point where that's the weird family, they can't do anything. Have you had to handle do you just explain this more to your child as they grow, or just hold the line and let your child be upset with you?
We talk about it fairly often still, and I'm glad this came up because there has been situations. So we do not let our kids have electronics. They do not have tablets. They do not have phones, and I don't know when I'm going to let them have it.
Mhm.
Maybe never. Maybe
Mhm.
when they're 40. I don't know. Um, but here's the point, and this is totally relevant for what you just asked. We have lots of friends that we've gone to church with or hung out with or that have homeschooled and we've been in co-ops together whose kids do have
Mhm.
tablets and those kids are on them incessantly.
Yes.
And I've looked at our kids and they now know if a kid pulls out a tablet and sits down and just starts going through it, because all kids, they cannot help themselves. It's not their fault. They're going to want to see what their friend's doing.
Yes.
And
It's literally
we're
designed to grab their attention. Yeah.
in more ways than you may know. And we're going to get
Right.
into that because this is an appropriate part of this conversation. So, the electronic social media world, game world, is rife with predation and grooming for years.
Mhm.
Teenage kids have left their families to go with their 4-year-old boyfriend and jumped out windows before. They've met such and such online who literally radicalizes them.
Right.
There's whole groups. I've just learned about a whole new topic of these groups without leaders, and they're literally labeling themselves as Satanists. And I'm not saying that for shock value or
No.
hyperbole. That is a fact. And the FBI and DHS, my old boss, has massive investigations going on right now with these groups because they target kids and young adults.
Mhm.
So the online world is massive. And I have gone to one of those dads and said, listen, if your kids keep pulling out tablets every time my kids are around, we're just not going to come around. It's as
Yeah.
simple as that.
Mhm.
One of the dads actually really respected that. He's like, I had no idea. I am
Yeah.
so sorry. I
Yeah.
really appreciate you saying this to me. And for a time, the tablets disappeared. Now they're back with
Mhm.
those kids. Sad, in my opinion. But others have gotten really, really angry with me, as in,
Mhm.
how dare you, you arrogant, pompous, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like I do not care, you know.
I think you have to have that kind of I do not care bit to you. And I think that is a little bit easier for men, just generally speaking, than for women. We can feel a little more guilt about that. And I know within the homeschooling world, particularly the classical world, it does feel like a lot of times when you have a certain standard or ideal, it does seem to be received as judgment. So to the parents who are like, how dare you say that to me? There's an element of feeling like you must think you're a better parent than me because you don't allow your kids to have these things. And that can make these things really tricky, particularly for the feminine side where like, oh, we don't upset you or offend you or anything. But again, when it comes back to your kids, you have to ask yourself and be upfront. Am I willing to endure the cost of this to keep my kids safe? And I asked about the older kids, and I'm glad we went into tech because obviously screens open up a whole new world to our children that can be full of predators and full of other things that groom them that maybe are not coming from a particular person, but just naturally in those directions. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the group Fight the New Drug. Are you aware of them? Okay,
Yes.
so I encourage moms to follow them. I think they have really helpful and useful things around explicit images online. I'm not actually sure if on YouTube I'm allowed to use the P word, but that is one thing that I know is grooming a lot of children at a younger and earlier age by like 6 or 7. I don't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but many children have been introduced to explicit images online. You mentioned gaming. That's another way that predators and explicit images kind of come into play. Do you have any advice or help for moms here?
Yeah. Don't let your kids play Roblox ever. I've never been on it, but it's a game called Roblox. It is insanely popular, and you can message and get friends on there. It's kind of this open world,
Okay.
and there are 30, 20, 30, 40-year-old men on there pretending to be 11-year-old girls, and they come after your kid. Minecraft. My kids play Minecraft all the time, but it is only in the parameters of strictly our home. We don't let any world sharing and all that other stuff. 0 people can come in and chat with our kids. We have those
So no
things
social
set up.
element. It's like a closed game in the
It's
house.
a closed, well, it's
Mhm.
in our house, it's closed, but
Okay.
most kids play it where you can run around and meet other people and you can
Okay.
chat and all this other stuff. They'll wear headphones
Mhm.
and do all these things. Even the kids games, the learning kids games, the small kids games, ABCs, numbers, and all that. there's actually been tests on this where the kids will be holding that pad, and those games are free. They're freeware. Well, they all have commercials in them to pay for things. And
Ads.
parents have actually put a camera back and seen a kid playing the game, and then a very explicit commercial will come on in front of them. So mom and dad will grab the pad and play the same game, and the commercial will never come in front of mom and dad
No
because
way.
that camera is watching the face of who's playing it
Oh, that's evil.
completely.
That's disgusting. I did not realize that was a thing.
So that's why we double down on art and music and books and story and play over any and all electronics.
Mhm.
Period. End of story. And I know I said this last time, but it's very interesting because the moguls of all these huge tech companies, the vast majority of them have their kids in learning situations where they do not touch an electronic at all, which is very interesting.
Very much so. Hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
it's almost like an imprisonment of the masses while the elite can opt out for something better.
It truly is.
Hmm.
And so at the end of the day, I again, we've touched on some dark stuff, and I can go a lot further and deeper, and I intend to further on my platforms and my website for later on. But I wanted this conversation to be a conversation starter between moms, dads, and their kids, and to kind of continue answering your question. Well, what do you do if you see something happening, or a lot of moms feel very judged? Have those dialogues. Have an intelligent classical dialogue with those you hang out with. Hey, what do you think about these things?
Hmm.
Okay, let's at least discuss it. Because there's a great thinker out there. He says I prefer clarity over agreement. So I would rather understand where somebody's at least coming from, so we can engage in a good dialogue and conversation, than avoid the conversation completely and never have it.
Yeah.
Okay, because when we have clarity where each other stands on something, at least somebody who may disagree with you will at least hopefully respect where you are and your
Hmm.
reasoning why. But again, it's this concept we keep coming back to it. Well, how do I talk to my kids about things?
Yeah.
You talk to your kids about these things. It's as simple as that. Don't game it. don't don't over age appropriate, as in don't treat your kids like they're 5 years younger than they really are.
Right.
Respect and honor the child, as Miss Charlotte Mason says. I've learned so much from you. um But it's true. Respect your kids enough to have this conversation with them. Be a family who is very bold and proactive in their stance and their demeanor towards these things. Protect your children from the evils of the world, but also make them capable of dealing with things when they will and do come up. Because here's the thing, it's going to happen to people you know. They're
Yeah.
going to hear about other friends. It's just a fact of life.
Hmm.
Okay. At some point, you and your family will encounter and deal with these things. I would rather we all collectively, as a classically homeschooled group, no matter where we are, be the ones leading the charge on changing our the family game. On no, we're not going to be like the rest of the world. We're going to stand in our faith. We're going to stand and love, honor, and respect this family that God has blessed us with, and we're going to be the social and societal change agent for our home, our community, and where we live.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I know when we were trying to figure out which direction to go with this, I said it's one of those things I don't really know enough to know exactly which questions I should be asking. So, as we kind of end here, is there anything else that you think is very vitally important for moms to get at this stage in the conversation? Anything that I didn't ask you about, but you wanted to share?
Hmm. It's honestly, I did the 10,000-foot view conversation on this. We could deep dive on all the different aspects of it. So I really do. I invite those comments, questions, emails on everything, because I will follow up with this. I'm glad to come and talk more, or very specifically, if that's needed and appropriate. But don't be fearful. I do want to leave you with that. I want to reiterate, instead of give more information, and choose. Fear is a natural reaction, like, oh God, I can't believe these things exist in the world, but they do. So work through that as best as possible, and don't be fearful of yourself. Don't make your children fearful. Make them eyes open and tall and strong.
Mm.
Okay. Protect their heart and their mind and their body, but give them the ability to navigate appropriately these conversations and this reality where we're at, because predation is on the rise. It and the FBI is really paying attention to this. There, and it's not just local groups doing it. I mentioned the online predation. It's actors nationally and globally who are really, really involved with these things and targeting families and children. So it's as simple as that. Engage in the conversation, have a regular dialogue with it. Don't allow a topic. Don't dive into absolutely unnecessary conversations or totally inappropriate topics with your kids. I'm not asking anyone to do that, but definitely deal with the subject, and don't be afraid of subjects. It's kind of like the drug conversation. That's another one that's just out of control these days.
Yeah.
But have the conversation with your kids about candy and people giving them things, and the weird little free tattoos that kids get from places that are laced with stuff. I mean, it's cascading effects. It can go on. But you mentioned it. We do have a God who protects, and so let's stand in that. But my favorite God phrase is, God can move mountains, but he expects me to show up with a shovel. It's true. So he wants us to do our part proactively and honor him with it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being willing to come and talk about something that is really rather dark, especially for moms who are typically just delighting in their fairy tales and reading with their children over here at the Commonplace. But I appreciate your ability to bring light and clarity to things that are dark so that they are not so scary, because we have learned more and know kind of where to go our next step. Can you, on the way out here, tell us about the Family Readiness Project? I can't remember if you mentioned already the podcast or what you're planning. So I want to make sure I will link everything below, but give you time to share about your projects, because I know moms want to learn more. I'm not an expert on this. You are. I want to send them to you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Follow Autumn on all her platforms. She's amazing and worth it. So that's good. The Family Readiness Project. I'm going to end with a Chesterton quote, though. And I might mess it up, but Chesterton said, I am messing it up. We do not tell our children tales of dragons for them to fear the dragon. We tell them tales of dragons so that they know that the dragons can be beat. Raise dragon slayers, moms and dads. So the Family for Readiness Project is my website, familyreadinessproject.com. The website is live and still being worked on. It's very clunky. I'm literally today, so by the time you guys watch this, I should have a few articles up, the podcast started, and some video going. Awesome. I've got a sign up page. And for those who have already signed up from the last episode, I'm going to be sending a newsletter out. Please continue to sign up, because I will keep everyone engaged and apprised. And I have so many travel and work projects, but now I am very involved in creating that space, because this is what I will be doing. I'm literally going out of town in about 30 minutes on a trip for training training men to be better future and current husbands, protectors, and have that mindset. So that's part of what we do. But the Family Readiness Project is thus just that. It's to prepare families, or to engage with families, and to make them ready for these things that happen. The world is a wild place right now. Wars everywhere. The FBI has terrorist alerts for everything almost every day. And there's literally things happening in our country that didn't happen about 10 years ago at all. And so and I've said this before, it's not that police and first responders don't want to show up and help you. They are literally overwhelmed. The escalation of situations in your town, USA, and I do mean that literally, has ramped up significantly in the last few years. and it's only going to continue. So it's indicative on mothers and fathers to take that mantle of readiness and protection for your families. Again, not to live in fear, but so your family's not kind of caught unawares and unprepared when the inevitable does happen, no matter what it is.
Wonderful. Again, I'll put all those links below, as well as our first conversation, so you can catch up on that. And Rick, thank you so much for being willing to come back and talk to us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Autumn. It's an honor and pleasure. I appreciate it.